I can still recall the shimmer of crystal glasses and the golden light spilling from chandeliers that seemed too grand for the human heart. It was London, a hotel ballroom draped in velvet and music, and the evening was meant to be mine. They said my name on stage, they smiled at me with admiration, and for a few suspended moments I believed the world was finally opening its arms. My name is Ashley Elliott. That night, I thought I had everything. My career as a journalist had carried me through years of exhaustion, of chasing deadlines and shaking hands that never really meant much. But this night was different. This night was a celebration of all that sweat and ambition. Daniel was there, standing tall, the partner who had walked beside me for 5 years. Sophia was there too, my oldest friend, laughing in her effortless way, shining with a beauty that pulled eyes from every corner of the room. Together, we looked like a picture framed for success and loyalty. I held my award in my hands, cool and heavy, and I felt proud. My editors kissed my cheeks, colleagues raised glasses in my honor, even strangers congratulated me with the kind of warmth that comes easily when champagne flows. Yet under all of it, I carried a tremor, a soft vibration of unease that I could not name. I tried to drown it in the sweetness of wine, in polite laughter, in Daniel's reassuring glance across the crowd. The music swelled, people danced, and I slipped out into the corridor. Not for any reason I could admit, I simply needed air. The corridor was long, dressed with mirrors and oil paintings, and my heels tapped against the marble floor like a steady metronome. I thought of calling my parents back in Sussex, thought of sending them a photo of me with the award. I thought of nothing more dangerous than that. Then I heard it, a sound that was too familiar to mistake. Sophia's laugh. Light and breathless, a laugh that once made me feel safe, like secrets shared under blankets. That night, it sliced through me like glass. I slowed my steps, almost against my will. The laugh was joined by a murmur, a voice pitched low, intimate. "Daniel?" I turned my head toward the sound, toward a narrow alcove just off the main hallway. There they were. I can still see it when I close my eyes. His hand pressed against her waist, steady as if it belonged there. Her fingers curled into the back of his neck, gentle and claiming at once. Their foreheads nearly touched. Their bodies leaned toward each other with the gravity of two planets colliding. Time did not slow. It stopped. I was frozen, incapable of breathing, of moving, of announcing myself. I watched the man I loved and the woman I trusted more than anyone build a world between them that had no door for me. It was not lust I saw. It was something deeper, a familiarity that shattered every belief I had held. They did not see me at first. In that cruel invisibility, my mind replayed everything I had ignored. The times Sophia's hand lingered too long on Daniel's arm. The way he laughed more freely when she made a joke. The night I returned from work late and found them both in the kitchen, leaning close over a recipe book, pretending not to notice how I hesitated at the door. I had swallowed it all, convinced myself it was paranoia, told myself that love required trust. Now trust was dissolving in front of me, melting like sugar in hot water. When Daniel finally lifted his head and noticed me, his face twisted into something half dread and half shame. Sophia's eyes widened for only a moment before she blinked and straightened, her expression sliding back into composure. She did not even flinch with guilt. She simply stood there, daring me to react. I could not. My throat was locked, my lungs tight, my hands trembling against the clutch I carried. Silence filled the space like smoke. No apology came, no desperate explanation, no rush to close the gap, just silence. And the collapse of everything I thought was real. I turned away. I do not remember how my legs moved, only that they did. Past the corridor, past the mirrors that showed a pale, broken woman who no longer looked like me, past the hum of music spilling from the ballroom. The celebration went on. I slipped through the hotel doors and into the London night. The air was sharp and cold, slicing into me as if the city itself were stripping me bare. People on the street laughed, cars honked, life moved. I stood on the pavement clutching the award I no longer wanted, feeling the ground tilt under my feet. That was the night I learned how quickly a future can disappear. That was the night betrayal became a shadow stitched into my skin. I walked without direction, only the need to escape the walls that had witnessed my undoing. The streets of London felt different, as though the buildings themselves knew a secret I had only just discovered. I wandered past shuttered shops and glowing cafes, my heels uneven on the cobblestones, my heart beating so violently I thought it might split. I stopped by the river. The Thames rolled dark beneath the bridges, carrying the city's reflections in ripples of silver. I leaned on the railing, the cold metal grounding me, and let the night air cut through the storm in my chest. The award was still in my hand, a useless piece of glass and metal heavy with irony. I wanted to throw it into the water, watch it sink, vanish with everything else that had just been taken from me, but I did not. Some part of me clutched it like proof that I had not imagined my worth, proof that at least one thing was still real. My phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit the screen, then Sophia's. Then both again. I could not bear to read the words. I switched it off, slid it into my purse as if burying a body. I kept walking until the city blurred around me. At one point, a taxi slowed beside me, the driver leaning out to ask if I needed a ride. His accent was rough, his eyes kind. I almost said yes. Instead, I shook my head and kept moving, as if walking might eventually take me to a place where none of this had happened. But there is no such place. I ended up in a small park, one of those corners of the city where the grass is worn and benches are carved with names of lovers who believed in forever. I sat there until the sky began to pale. I thought of the years I had given Daniel. The nights I stayed awake editing his work, the mornings I brewed coffee so he could sleep longer, the dreams we spoke of in whispers. I thought of Sophia and the way we used to braid each other's hair before exams, how she held my secrets as if they were treasures. Two people who had shaped me and both had decided I was expendable. The betrayal was not just in their touch. It was in every memory that now felt poisoned. It was in the knowledge that while I had been building trust, they had been chiseling cracks. When the first buses rattled by, when the sky turned gray with morning, I finally stood. My body felt heavier, as though gravity itself had increased. I made my way back to the hotel where my bag waited. I did not dare go upstairs. I asked the concierge to fetch my things, my voice shaking but firm enough to discourage questions. He looked at me as if he understood more than I said. I scribbled a note on hotel stationery. Just 5 words, I need time. I left it at the desk, not knowing if it would reach either of them, not knowing if I even cared. By the time London truly woke, I was gone. The train to the airport was crowded with commuters, their lives intact, their futures unshattered. I stared at the blur of buildings and thought about my parents in Sussex. Should I tell them? Should I confess that everything they believed about Daniel and me had exploded in a single night? I could not. The shame was too sharp, the wound too raw, so I stayed silent, even as my heart screamed. On the plane to New York, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the clouds swallow the city I had called home. I did not cry. Not then. I sat perfectly still, as if any movement might split me into pieces too small to gather again. The tears came later, in the quiet of a rented apartment, in the loneliness of nights when the walls felt too close. They came without warning, drowning me while I tried to sleep, soaking pillows that never dried before morning. They came with smells, with sounds, with every reminder of what had been mine. A cologne drifting from a stranger in the subway, a laugh echoing too much like hers. A shadow at the corner of a cafe where Daniel and I once planned our future, but all of that was still ahead. On that night, as the plane crossed the ocean, I was only one thing. Alone. That was the beginning of the end of who I used to be. New York was supposed to be a beginning, but to me it felt like exile. I stepped off the plane with nothing but a suitcase and the hollow shell of who I once was. The city did not care. It roared around me with horns and voices, neon signs and steam rising from the pavement. People rushed past, clutching coffee cups and briefcases, their lives urgent and intact. I drifted among them, invisible, carrying a silence that felt louder than the city itself. I rented a small apartment on the Upper West Side, the kind with peeling paint and a window that faced a brick wall. It smelled of dust and forgotten tenants. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I just needed space to think, to breathe, to stitch myself back together. But the truth was I did not know how. Every night I came home to that empty space, the radiator clanging like a heartbeat, the floor creaking as if the building itself sighed under my weight. I unpacked my clothes but left the suitcase by the door, unwilling to admit that this was my life now. The closet looked strange with only half the garments it once held. Daniel had the other half, his shirts that I had ironed, his sweaters that smelled faintly of cedar. I imagined Sophia wearing them, laughing in them, and the thought burned so hot I had to press my palms against the cool plaster walls to steady myself. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into assignments at the news desk, taking stories no one else wanted, staying late long after the office emptied. I wrote until my fingers ached, until words blurred on the screen. My editors praised my dedication, said I was climbing fast, but none of them knew I was using exhaustion as armor. If I worked enough, I did not have to feel. Nights were the worst. I would sit at the window, staring at the fire escape across the alley, watching shadows move behind curtains in other people's apartments. Couples laughed, argued, kissed, cooked meals together. Their lives played out like silent films I was no longer invited to. The loneliness seeped into me like damp through old walls. Sometimes I dreamed of London, of that ballroom, of Daniel's hand on Sophia's waist. I would wake gasping, tangled in sheets, my throat raw from silent screams. Other times I dreamed of a different life, one where I turned the corner that night and found nothing, where Daniel was waiting with open arms and Sophia was smiling with pride for me. Waking from those dreams was worse because it reminded me of what would never be. I stopped answering calls from my parents. At first, I told myself I was too busy, but the truth was I could not bear their voices. They loved Daniel. They loved Sophia like a daughter. How could I explain that the two people they adored had gutted me? Shame clung to me like a second skin. I was terrified they would pity me, or worse, judge me for not being enough to keep him, enough to keep her loyalty. Food lost its taste. Sleep became a stranger. I carried dark circles under my eyes, my body thinner, my spirit fractured. People noticed. A barista who learned my order by heart once asked if I was all right. I lied with a smile. Colleagues joked that I lived in the office. I laughed too loudly, trying to prove them wrong. Inside, I was dissolving. One night, nearly 3 months after arriving, I opened the shoebox where I had hidden everything. A photo of Daniel and me on holiday in Lisbon, smiling against the sea. A bracelet Sophia had given me on my 21st birthday. Notes scribbled in Daniel's handwriting about groceries and reminders. I stared at them until my vision blurred. Then I shoved them back into the box, sealed the lid with tape, and pushed it under my bed. Out of sight, but not out of mind. The past clung no matter how deep I buried it. There were days I thought of running again. Moving to another city, another country, changing my name, starting over as if I had never been Ashley Elliott at all. But no matter where I went, the betrayal would follow. It lived inside me now, woven into every thought, so I stayed. I walked the city streets until my feet blistered. I sat in cafes with a notebook, pretending to write when all I did was stare at blank pages. I told myself that if I just kept moving, maybe one day the pain would slow, maybe one day it would loosen its grip. It did not yet. What I did not know then was that loneliness has a strange shape. It carves you hollow, but in doing so, it makes space. And eventually, someone would arrive to fill it. The city became my disguise. New York is full of people who vanish into crowds, and I learned quickly how to blend. I let the noise swallow me, the subway doors close behind me, the tides of strangers carry me block to block. I could disappear in plain sight, and no one asked questions. That was what I needed, or at least what I told myself. My apartment grew colder with each passing week. The radiator sputtered and hissed like it had secrets, the pipes moaned, and sometimes in the silence of midnight I could swear the building breathed. I lived among stacks of newspapers, half-drunk cups of coffee, and notebooks filled with sentences that never formed into stories. It was not living, really. It was waiting. For what I could not say. Work gave me a reason to get up. I became the one who volunteered for everything. Breaking news in the Bronx, I was there. Political hearings that dragged until dawn, I sat in the back row taking notes until my hand cramped. Stories no one else cared to chase, I took them and polished them until they shone. My editors called me relentless. They used words like dedicated and unstoppable. They did not know I was simply afraid of stopping. If I stopped, the silence would return, and silence was where memory lived. Some nights, exhaustion would knock me out on the sofa with my clothes still on, a lamp buzzing overhead. Other nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster like maps of roads I would never travel. I thought about calling Daniel just to scream, to demand why. I thought about calling Sophia to ask if it was worth it, if stealing what was mine had given her joy. But my pride strangled those impulses. I would not give them the satisfaction of hearing my voice broken. Once, after a particularly long day, I found myself walking downtown without meaning to. My feet led me into a bookstore, and I wandered the aisles as if searching for an answer printed on a spine. I ended up in the travel section, staring at books about cities I had never seen. Paris, Rome, Tokyo. I wondered what it would feel like to stand in those places as someone new, someone unscarred. The thought tempted me, but even as I traced the glossy covers with my fingers, I knew I would carry the same ghosts no matter where I went. Loneliness began to shape me. I noticed how it sharpened the edges of everything. A couple holding hands on the subway looked like a cruel performance. A family laughing at a diner booth pierced me with envy. Even a stranger brushing past me on the sidewalk felt like a reminder of touch I no longer had. I hated that I measured the world by what I had lost. On Sundays, when the city slowed, the weight pressed hardest. I would sit by the window with a mug of tea gone cold, watching church bells ring across rooftops, listening to the faint hum of children playing in the street below. Those sounds belonged to a world I no longer trusted. Love, family, faith, they had all betrayed me. There were moments when I thought about giving up altogether, not in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet way people fade. I thought about shrinking my world to the office and the apartment, thought about becoming invisible until one day no one remembered I had ever existed. But then some stubborn ember inside me resisted. Perhaps it was pride, or the simple refusal to let Sophia and Daniel erase me. I did not want to vanish. I wanted to live, though I no longer knew how. 6 months passed like that, days stitched together with deadlines and nights stitched apart with tears. I was surviving, not healing. My colleagues saw only the surface, the woman who never missed a story, the one whose name was appearing more often in print. They did not see the cracks beneath. Then, one Friday, an invitation arrived in my inbox. A gallery opening downtown, some artist I barely remembered from my university days. At first, I almost deleted it. Social events had become unbearable. But something in me paused. A whisper, maybe, that life could not stay this narrow forever. Against my own reluctance, I pressed yes. I did not know it yet, but that single decision would shift everything. That night, as I stood before the mirror, smoothing a black dress I had not worn in years, I caught my reflection and did not recognize her. My face was thinner, my eyes older, but somewhere in that reflection was still the woman who once believed in beginnings. I told her quietly, "You will find a way back." I did not believe it, not yet, but I spoke it anyway. I stepped into the New York night, the streets humming with light, and for the first time since London I allowed myself to wonder. What if something good was still waiting? The gallery was in a narrow street downtown, the kind of place you would miss if you were not looking. A single brass lamp glowed above the entrance, and through the window I could see slashes of color across canvases, shadows of guests drifting with glasses of wine. My instinct was to turn around. I almost did. For months I had avoided rooms like this, rooms where voices swirled with laughter and art seemed to mock my emptiness. But I forced myself through the door. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and citrus. People clustered in small groups, their conversations rising and falling like waves. I hugged the edges of the room, studying paintings I did not understand, sipping wine I did not taste. I was invisible again, but this time I did not mind. Then a voice said my name, Ashley Elliott. I turned, startled. A man stood a few feet away, tall, his dark hair threaded with early silver, his posture relaxed as if nothing in the world could disturb him. I blinked, trying to place him. His eyes held recognition, a quiet certainty that unsettled me. "It is you," he said. "I almost did not believe it when I saw you walk in." For a second I considered denying it, pretending to be someone else, a stranger, anyone but the woman whose life had collapsed. But the weight of his gaze made lying impossible. "Yes," I said softly, "it is me." He stepped closer, not intrusively, but with a calm that felt like an invitation rather than a demand. "Ethan Ward," he introduced himself. "We met years ago, briefly. A mutual connection through Daniel." The name fell between us like a stone in water. Daniel. My chest tightened. I remembered hearing the name before, long ago. Ethan had been a photographer, a friend from Daniel's graduate days. I had never known him well. Yet here he was, in New York, as if the city itself had conspired to bring him across my path. We spoke cautiously at first. About the art, about the absurd price of the wine, about how strange it felt to see familiar faces in unfamiliar places. He did not ask about Daniel, not directly. He did not ask about Sophia either. He simply asked what I had been working on, whether I still preferred writing longhand before typing, whether New York felt like a home yet. His questions were light, but they carried weight, like doors he left open if I chose to step through. I surprised myself by answering, not everything, not the whole truth, but enough. I told him about long nights at the office, about the city's relentless energy, about how I was learning to walk faster just to keep pace. He listened without interrupting, nodding sometimes, smiling faintly when I caught myself apologizing for speaking too much. When the crowd shifted and the music swelled, I realized I had been standing with him for nearly an hour. The glass in my hand was empty, my nerves strangely calm. For the first time in months, I did not feel like an exposed wound. I felt seen. As we lingered near a painting of fractured shapes and violent colors, Ethan tilted his head, studying it. "Funny," he murmured, "this reminds me of Paris." "Paris," I echoed, puzzled. "Yes, Daniel once mentioned it to me." He said he had been there during a conference, but when I ran into him one evening, he was not with colleagues, he was with someone else, someone from back home. Ethan's voice was casual, but his eyes flicked toward me as if measuring my reaction. My stomach clenched. Back home, Ethan nodded. I thought it odd at the time. He introduced her only briefly, but I swear she looked familiar. I forced a smile, though my heart raced. The thought pressed into me like a blade. Could it have been Sophia? And if it was, had it begun earlier than I ever suspected? I excused myself to the restroom, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection stared back, pale and unsettled. The betrayal I had believed began in London might have deeper roots, older shadows. When I returned, Ethan did not press. He simply offered me another drink, and we spoke of books, of cities, of the strange way art forces us to face what we avoid. Yet the seed had been planted. His words lingered long after I left the gallery, walking home under the neon sky. That night, for the first time in months, I dreamed not only of the past, but of what might still be ahead. The following week, I found myself walking through Central Park on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of gray, damp day that drives most people indoors. I had no reason to be out. I told myself I was getting fresh air, but really I was restless, searching for something I could not name. And then, as if the city had decided for me, I saw him again. Ethan was standing near Bethesda Fountain, his camera lifted, capturing the pigeons as they scattered into the drizzle. He noticed me before I could decide whether to approach. His smile was small but genuine, and he lowered the camera as though I was the image he had been waiting for. "Ashley," he said, as if my name belonged easily on his tongue. I almost laughed at the absurdity. New York was vast. What were the chances of crossing paths twice in a week after years of silence? Yet there he was, and I was not sorry. We walked together through the park, talking about nothing and everything. He asked about my favorite coffee shops, about the music I listened to when I wrote, about whether I ever allowed myself to turn off my phone. He never asked about Daniel, never about Sophia. That silence was its own kind of mercy. We ended up in a cafe near the edge of the park, our coats dripping rain onto the floor. The place was crowded, filled with the hum of conversations, but somehow our corner felt like a pocket of calm. Ethan ordered tea for both of us, remembering that I had mentioned my preference at the gallery. It was a small thing, but it struck me deeply. Daniel had never remembered details like that. We talked until the windows fogged. He told me about his years traveling for photography, about the loneliness of hotel rooms, about the way he often wondered whether constant movement was just another way of running from himself. I told him about the newsroom, about deadlines that blurred days together, about how I sometimes wrote just to hear the sound of keys clicking. He listened as though every word mattered. When we finally stepped back out into the drizzle, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed again and again. Sometimes by accident, sometimes by choice. A bookstore where we both reached for the same travel essay. A lecture on media ethics where he sat 2 rows behind me. A quiet evening when he called and asked if I wanted to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge just because the night was too beautiful to waste indoors. With each meeting, I felt the walls around me shift. Ethan never rushed, never pried. He simply stood beside me, offering space without demand. And in that space, I began to breathe again. Still, the shadow of his words lingered. Paris. Someone from back home. I replayed it over and over, hearing the unspoken suggestion. Was Sophia already in Daniel's arms before the night I discovered them? Was the betrayal not sudden but carefully hidden all along? One evening, unable to hold the question in, I asked him, "You said you saw Daniel in Paris. Are you sure it was someone from my world?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes thoughtful. "I am not certain," he admitted. Faces blur with time, but there was something about her smile, something familiar. The answer chilled me. It was not proof, but it was enough to plant doubt deeper into my bones. We walked in silence for a while. Then Ethan said softly, "Whatever happened, it does not define who you are. People choose their betrayals. You do not have to carry them forever." His words sank into me, both comfort and challenge. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to shed the weight of what Sophia and Daniel had done. But part of me clung to the pain, as if letting go would mean admitting they had never mattered. Yet even as the questions haunted me, something new was forming. Nights spent with Ethan felt different. We cooked simple meals, drank tea, listened to old jazz records he collected. Sometimes I cried without warning, and he never asked me to explain. Sometimes I laughed, surprising myself, and he laughed with me, his eyes crinkling in quiet joy. I began to realize that healing was not loud or sudden. It was slow, a drip of water filling a dry well. And for the first time since London, I felt the well inside me stir with something that might one day be hope. Still, in the back of my mind, the image of Daniel in Paris with someone familiar remained like a puzzle missing its final piece. I could not yet see the whole picture. But I sensed it was waiting for me, somewhere in the path ahead. It began not as a whirlwind, but as a slow unfolding, like dawn creeping through heavy curtains. Ethan and I did not rush. We never once called it love, not at first. We called it company, coincidence, comfort. But something inside me knew it was more, even when I was too cautious to admit it. We saw each other often, sometimes planned, sometimes by chance, though I started to suspect chance was less random than it appeared. I found myself waiting for his messages, checking for his name on my phone. He never wrote long paragraphs, never showered me with grand gestures, just simple notes. Coffee? Walk? You awake? And each time I said yes, my chest lightened. One evening he came over with groceries, unannounced but not unwelcome. He moved through my small kitchen with ease, chopping onions, boiling pasta, humming under his breath. I watched him, struck by how natural it felt, how quiet. Daniel used to fill rooms with his voice, his opinions, his constant need to be noticed. Ethan filled rooms with calm. We ate on the couch, plates balanced on our laps, steam fogging my glasses. It was nothing remarkable, yet it felt like the most human meal I had eaten in months. Later, as we listened to rain tapping the windows, I dozed against his shoulder. He did not move. He simply let me rest, as if holding the weight of me was the most ordinary thing. Nights blurred into weeks. We explored the city like two wanderers, finding bookstores tucked into alleys, tiny jazz clubs that seemed to exist only for us, bakeries that sold croissants still warm at dawn. With him, the city softened. It no longer felt like exile but like a place where I could belong. He never asked me for confessions, yet slowly I gave them. A mention of sleepless nights, a hint about Sophia, a fragment of the ballroom in London. He listened, not to respond but to receive. Sometimes his silence felt like the deepest answer. There were nights when grief still ambushed me. I would turn away in bed, tears sliding into the pillow, ashamed of breaking again. Ethan would touch my shoulder gently, not to stop the tears but to remind me I was not alone. Those were the moments I began to understand love differently. Not as fireworks, not as dramatic declarations, but as presence. Steady, unwavering presence. And in return, I began to see Ethan more clearly. His solitude, his quiet habits, the way he avoided certain questions about his past. He carried his own shadows, though he never laid them at my feet. He had learned, like me, that some wounds are spoken only when trust is unshakable. The seasons shifted. Leaves fell, snow dusted the streets, then spring returned. By then, we had slipped into a rhythm that felt like home. We shared a loft in Soho, brick walls lined with his photographs and my stacks of books. Plants thrived on the windowsill despite my history of neglecting them. Friends came by sometimes, but mostly it was just us, a universe of two. One morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds, Ethan placed a cup of tea on the bedside table and sat beside me. He did not kneel, did not produce a ring with flourish. He simply asked, "Do you want to marry me?" I blinked at him, startled by the ease of it. His face was calm, no expectation, only sincerity. And in that moment, I realized I did not need flowers or aisles or applause. I only needed this. "Yes," I whispered. We married in a courthouse a few weeks later. 2 witnesses we met that morning signed the papers. A judge with tired eyes recited vows in a voice both weary and kind. It rained outside, soft and persistent, but inside it was warm. I wore a navy dress. Ethan wore a gray suit with a crooked tie. We laughed as we walked out, splitting a croissant at the bakery down the block, flaky crumbs catching in his hair. There was no announcement. I did not call my parents. I did not tell Sophia, did not tell Daniel. This was mine, ours, a secret not of shame but of protection. For once, I was guarding joy instead of pain. Life with Ethan was quiet, deliberate, steady, and I was happy. Truly deeply, in a way that felt like a miracle after so much ruin. Yet sometimes, when the city was silent and he was asleep beside me, the thought returned. Paris, back home, someone familiar, the puzzle piece that still did not fit. I tried to ignore it, but it lingered, a shadow at the edge of my joy. I told myself it did not matter, that the past was past and what I had now was enough. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Shadows do not vanish until you face them. The years that followed did not arrive with grand announcements. They slipped quietly into place, day after day, until I realized I had built something new without even noticing. Life with Ethan was not about milestones, but about rhythms. In the mornings, he brewed coffee just the way I liked it, oat milk with the faintest touch of cinnamon. Sometimes he left it by the window if I was still asleep, and the rising sun would warm the mug until I woke. In the evenings, we cooked together. Nothing elaborate, just soups and stir-fries, meals that tasted better because we made them side by side. On weekends, we drove out of the city, following no map, discovering diners in small towns, watching rivers cut through forests, sharing silence that never felt heavy. Our loft grew into a place that carried our fingerprints. He filled the walls with his photographs, vast landscapes that reminded me of how small and fleeting pain could be. I filled the shelves with books, pages underlined with notes, margins scribbled with thoughts I was no longer afraid to have. Friends visited, bringing wine and stories, and we hosted them not to impress but to share. Our lives had become an orbit, steady and self-sustaining. I had expected marriage to feel like a declaration, a banner waving above my head. Instead, it felt like a whisper, like a hand resting on my back reminding me I was not alone. It was not dramatic, not cinematic. It was real. There were still nights when grief visited, uninvited. Sometimes I dreamed of London, of the way Sophia's laughter sliced through me, of Daniel's eyes filled with guilt. I would wake trembling, and Ethan would pull me close, his chest steady beneath my cheek, his heartbeat a reminder that I had survived. Other times I dreamed of what might have been if betrayal had never come. Those dreams left me emptier than the nightmares. Ethan never asked me to forget. He never demanded closure I did not have. He simply reminded me through presence that the future could be larger than the past. Slowly, the sharp edges dulled. Slowly, I began to smile without catching myself, laugh without suspicion. Yet the shadow of Paris never fully left. It haunted the quiet spaces, whispered when I was alone. I did not know whether it was truth or imagination, whether Sophia had been in Daniel's arms long before I knew. The question clung like a loose thread, daring me to pull. I resisted, afraid of unraveling the piece I had built. 2 years passed this way. We marked time not with anniversaries but with small rituals. A particular bench in Central Park where we always sat in autumn. A bakery where we split the same pastry every February. A record store that kept a copy of old jazz albums just for us. These were the anchors of our love, modest yet indestructible. And then, one afternoon in early summer, the phone rang. It was a number I recognized but had not seen in years. My grandfather's voice filled the line, softer than I remembered, tinged with age. "Ashley," he said, "I am turning 85 next month. I want one dinner, just the family, one night." My throat tightened. He was the only one who had reached out in the years I stayed away. The only one who sent birthday cards, who wrote letters in his careful hand, never pressing but always reminding me I was not forgotten. Somehow, even without being told, he knew I had married. His words carried the weight of someone who saw through distance. I hesitated. The thought of facing them again, my parents, Sophia, Daniel, made my stomach clench, but I could not deny him. He was the thread still tying me to the part of myself I had left behind. "Yes," I whispered. "For you, I will come." Ethan watched me hang up the phone, concern in his quiet eyes. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know, but I want to," I replied. "Not for them." For him, we decided we would go together. I would not walk back into that house alone. Not again. That night, as I lay beside Ethan, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Memories of betrayal tangled with the life I had built since. I was no longer the woman who fled London in the middle of the night. I was stronger, steadier. But strength does not erase fear. In the dark, I whispered to myself, "Whatever waits there, you can face it now." The days after my grandfather's call stretched like taut strings, every hour humming with memory. I told myself it was only a dinner, one evening, a simple table set with dishes I had once known by heart. But I also knew it was more than that. It was walking back into the epicenter of the earthquake that had split my life in two. I tried to keep busy, but my thoughts circled back again and again. The clink of glasses, Sophia's laugh, Daniel's hand resting where it did not belong. It all replayed like a scene etched into glass, unbreakable, unchanging. I wondered how I would look into their eyes after so many years. Would they flinch? Would they smile? Would they pretend nothing had ever happened? Ethan noticed the way my shoulders stayed tense, the way my voice faltered when I spoke about it. One evening he set aside his camera and said quietly, "Tell me what you are most afraid of." I stared at him, unsure how to answer. "That they will hurt me again," I whispered. "That they will act like nothing matters. Or worse, that it never mattered at all." He nodded, not with pity but with understanding. Then he reached for my hand, warm and steady. "Whatever happens, you are not the woman who walked away alone. You are not going back empty. You are going with me." His words settled inside me like a shield. We booked tickets to London. As the date approached, I found myself packing and unpacking the same suitcase, as though folding sweaters could somehow fold away dread. I chose a simple dress for the dinner, navy blue, nothing extravagant. I did not want to make an entrance. I wanted only to endure. The morning of our flight, the city buzzed with summer heat. I stood at the window of our loft, watching taxis crawl below, and thought about the version of me who had arrived here years ago, broken and aimless. I wanted to tell her that survival was possible, that joy could be rebuilt. But I also knew she would not have believed me then. At the airport, Ethan carried both our bags. He walked beside me through the terminals, not speaking much, just present. The hum of travelers, the smell of coffee, the crackle of announcements, all of it faded against the drum of my heart. I had not stepped foot in England since the night I ran. When the plane lifted, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched New York shrink beneath clouds. It had become my refuge, my reinvention. Leaving it, even briefly, felt like leaving safety. Hours later, when the coastline of England appeared, green fields meeting the gray sea, my chest tightened. Memories surged. Childhood summers in the garden, my mother's voice calling us to dinner, Sophia's hand pulling me toward mischief. And then, layered over it all, the memory of betrayal. We drove south from London in a rented car, the familiar roads winding through villages, hedges heavy with summer bloom. Each mile pressed heavier on my chest. The closer we came, the more the past stirred. Ethan reached across the console, his hand closing over mine. His thumb traced circles against my skin, steadying me. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, the light was turning gold. The house looked exactly the same. The ivy crawling up the stone walls, the swing creaking softly on the porch, the scent of roses from the garden. Time had not touched it, though it had ravaged me. I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady. The gravel crunched under my shoes. For a moment I stood still, staring at the door, remembering the last time I had walked through it. My heart pounded so loud I was sure Ethan could hear it. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I admitted, "but I will go anyway." Together, we crossed the threshold. The door creaked just as it always had, releasing a wave of scents that belonged to my childhood: roasted herbs, old wood polished too many times, faint lavender drifting from the linen cupboard down the hall. For an instant I was not 32, married, scarred, and wary. I was 12, clutching school books, calling for my mother. The familiarity struck me like a blow. My mother appeared first, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her hair tied back with the same careless knot she had always worn. She froze when she saw me. Her lips parted, a sharp intake of breath, then she smiled too quickly. "Ashley, I didn't know you would really come." I forced my own smile, brittle as glass. "You invited me, didn't you?" She blinked as though the words unsettled her, then moved forward to kiss my cheek. "You look, well, better than I expected." My father entered next, tall, shoulders heavier than I remembered. He gave a curt nod, as if I had only been gone a week, not years. "Travel safe?" he asked, already turning toward the oven. I murmured yes. No embrace, no questions, just the kind of silence that tries to pass as normal. And then I heard it, a voice that carried warmth even through age. My grandfather shuffled in from the living room, leaning on his cane. His eyes lit when they found me. "Cass," he called me, the nickname no one else ever used. "You came." I crossed the room quickly, my throat tight. I hugged him, the only embrace that felt real. "Of course I came." "For you," he smiled, his hand lingering on mine. "That is all I wanted." Behind me, Ethan cleared his throat politely. My mother's eyes slid to him, curious. "And who is this?" "This is my husband," I said before hesitation could creep in. The word husband landed heavily in the room. My mother's smile faltered. My father's hand stilled on the counter. My grandfather's grin widened. "I knew it. I could hear it in your letters even when you didn't say it." Ethan stepped forward, calm as always, extending his hand. "Ethan Ward." My mother shook it, polite but stiff. My father muttered a greeting. The silence that followed was thick, full of unspoken questions. "Come," my grandfather said, breaking it. "Help me set the table." We moved into the dining room. The long oak table gleamed under a chandelier, set with china I had not seen in years. I laid silverware with my mother, each clink against porcelain echoing the distance between us. She asked where we lived, what Ethan did for work, whether New York was too loud. The questions were surface level, polite, as if she were speaking to distant relatives rather than her daughter returned. I glanced toward my father. He busied himself with wine decanters, avoiding eye contact. His silence said more than words. My absence had been folded into the family fabric and sewn shut, a seam no one dared unpick. The house was full of ghosts. Every corner whispered memory. The staircase where Sophia and I once slid down in sleeping bags. The den where Daniel had sat with a book while I worked beside him. the kitchen where my mother hummed as she cooked. Each memory layered over the present, a haunting I could not escape. I reminded myself I was not alone this time. Ethan brushed against my hand as he passed me a fork, the smallest gesture but enough to steady me. Still, the dread tightened. I had not yet seen Sophia, not Daniel. Their absence was loud, a silence waiting to break. My stomach knotted. I knew it was only a matter of time before footsteps would sound in the hall and I would face the past not as memory but as flesh. My grandfather poured wine, his voice trembling but strong with intent. "Tonight is about family," he said, "about roots that survive storms." I raised my glass though my hand shook. Family. The word tasted bitter and sweet all at once. As we sat, the door opened. Footsteps, a laugh, my body stiffened. The moment I had dreaded was here. The dining room seemed smaller than I remembered. Perhaps it was the weight of so many unsaid words pressing against its walls, or perhaps it was just me, older, carrying years of silence, filling the space with all I had not spoken. The chandelier overhead burned with a steady glow, scattering light across polished wood and china, but the brightness did nothing to ease the shadow in the air. My parents moved stiffly, like actors who had rehearsed this dinner, but forgotten their lines. My father busied himself with decanters and cutlery. My mother straightened napkins that had already been perfectly straight. And my grandfather, though stooped and frail, sat at the head of the table like a lighthouse, steady, unblinking, his presence the only anchor I trusted in the storm. But the storm was coming. I heard it before I saw it, the unmistakable cadence of heels across the hall, confident, practiced, and behind them, slower footsteps that seemed to stumble with reluctance. The door opened. Sophia entered first, of course. She had always known how to claim a room. She wore pale silk that clung like water, her hair falling in waves that gleamed beneath the chandelier. Her smile was immediate, sharp as a blade disguised in velvet. She paused just inside the doorway, eyes sweeping across us with the ease of a queen returning to court. Daniel followed. His presence was a contrast so stark it almost startled me. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes, his once careful posture softened into something weary. The sight of him hit like a blow to my chest, memories rushing forward unbidden, his laugh in quiet kitchens, his hand brushing mine, the night everything fractured. My throat closed, but I forced myself to remain still. For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking clock on the mantel became thunder in the silence. Then Sophia's voice broke it, honeyed and cruel all at once. "Well, Ashley, imagine my surprise." Her smile widened, though her eyes stayed cold. "You actually came. I didn't think you would. Disappearing has always been your specialty, hasn't it?" Her words slid across the table like knives. I managed a small, brittle smile. "Hello, Sophia, Daniel?" Daniel's nod was barely more than a dip of his head. "Ashley," he said, my name a monotone syllable. No apology, no recognition of what had been done, just emptiness. Beneath the table, Ethan's hand found mine. His thumb traced a quiet circle against my skin, grounding me, reminding me I was no longer alone in this house. My mother clapped her hands together softly, too brightly. "Good, we're all here. Let's not let the food go cold." And so the play began. We took our seats. Sophia settled directly across from me, Daniel beside her. Their alignment was deliberate, as though even in this they wanted to occupy the same space I did. My pulse quickened, but I lifted my chin, unwilling to shrink. The first course arrived, bowls of soup, steam curling upward only to vanish in the thick air. We ate in silence for a few moments, the clink of spoons against porcelain the only sound. My mother asked questions that floated at the surface, about New York, about my work, about the weather. I answered politely, briefly. She did not ask about the years I had been gone, nor did I offer them. Ethan, steady as ever, filled the gaps. He spoke of photography, of the way the city hummed, of how we had built small rituals to make it feel like home. His voice was warm but measured, and I saw surprise flicker across my mother's face. They had not expected him. They had not expected me to have found someone like him. Sophia's spoon rang against her glass. The sound was deliberate, a silvery chime that pulled every gaze to her. "If we're speaking of family," she said sweetly, "we should also speak of honesty." My shoulders stiffened. She leaned forward slightly, her smile widening. "Imagine our shock, seeing you walk in here with a husband none of us knew existed. Hiding things, Ashley? That doesn't sound very familial." The accusation was wrapped in silk, but it was still an accusation. I set my spoon down carefully, folded my hands together, and met her eyes. "Not everything belongs to everyone, Sophia. Some things are private. Some things are mine." For an instant her smile faltered, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the flash of annoyance beneath. But she recovered quickly, leaning back in her chair, eyes glittering. Daniel shifted beside her. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched. "Sophia," he said quietly. "Enough." The room stilled. He rarely contradicted her, not like this. Sophia turned her head toward him sharply. "Excuse me?" But he said nothing more, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. My mother cleared her throat, my father poured more wine. But my grandfather reached across, his hand trembling as it closed over mine. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Cass," he said, his voice rough but steady. Heat prickled behind my eyes, but I held them open. I would not cry, not here. Sophia smiled again, but this time it was thinner, crueler. "Well, secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? We'll see how long yours last." Her words lingered like smoke. Dinner had only just begun. The silence after Sophia's jab thickened. Forks hovered midair. My father pretended to study the wine's legs on the inside of his glass as though they held scripture. My mother rearranged the salad tongs, lips pursed as if she could smooth the tension by brute force. Ethan remained calm, almost unnervingly so. He cut into his chicken, chewed, swallowed, and then said in that steady, unhurried voice of his, "Privacy isn't the opposite of honesty. Sometimes it's the only way to protect what's real." He wasn't looking at Sophia when he spoke, but the words landed between them like a card laid face up. My grandfather's eyes twinkled, and for the first time that evening, I felt the tiniest lift in my chest. Sophia's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the stem of her wineglass tightened. "That's a very convenient philosophy," she replied, "especially if you're trying to hide something." Ethan finally looked at her. Calm, direct. "Or if you're trying to guard something worth keeping." For a moment the two of them held each other's gaze, silence stretching taut across the table. Sophia blinked first, lifting her glass to her lips. I wanted to thank him, but my throat was locked. Gratitude surged through me nonetheless, a tide pushing against the dam of years I had built inside. The courses passed slowly, like hours disguised as minutes. Roast chicken with rosemary. Vegetables arranged with my mother's meticulous touch. Bread rolls from the same bakery my grandfather insisted on for decades. Each bite tasted of memory more than flavor. Every corner of the house whispered with ghosts. The staircase where Sophia and I once slid down in sleeping bags. The den where Daniel had read beside me, feet tangled under the same blanket. The kitchen where my mother hummed, the same melody she hummed tonight, though the tune trembled. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to be lured into those corners. Across from me, Sophia never stopped performing. She laughed too loudly at my father's dry remarks. She placed her hand on Daniel's wrist as though claiming territory. She filled silences with stories about her new projects, her friends in the city, all polished to gleam under the chandelier's light. But there was desperation under the shine, and I could see it, an edge to her laughter, a flicker too quick in her eyes when Daniel withdrew his hand. Daniel spoke little. His shoulders slumped more with each minute. Once, our gazes met across the table. His lips parted as though he might speak, but he dropped his eyes to his plate. Cowardice, I thought bitterly, tastes the same even years later. My grandfather raised his glass. His hand trembled, but his voice was clear. "To family," he said. "To roots that weather storms." We all raised our glasses. I tasted bitterness in the wine, but I swallowed it. Sophia's eyes flickered. She tapped her spoon lightly against her glass. That familiar sound again, a stage cue she had used since we were children. Attention shifted to her. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, syrup thickening in her tone. My stomach clenched. She smiled sweetly, gaze fixed on me. "It's remarkable, really. My dear sister disappears for years and then returns with a husband none of us have ever met. Bold, wouldn't you say?" My mother's fork scraped faintly against her plate. My father coughed. I kept my spine straight. "Some things don't need an audience, Sophia. Marriage is one of them." Her smirk deepened. "Some of us believe in transparency, but I suppose others prefer secrecy." The air thinned. Ethan's voice slid in like calm water. "Transparency without kindness is just cruelty dressed as virtue." Sophia tilted her head. "And who appointed you the philosopher of this table?" He didn't flinch. "No appointment needed, just observation." My chest warmed at his restraint, his quiet armor placed around me. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel's chair scraped back slightly. His voice was quiet but firm. "That's enough, Sophia." Shock rippled across the table. My mother froze. My father finally looked up. Sophia turned toward him sharply. "Excuse me?" Daniel shook his head. His eyes looked haunted. "You don't have to do this, not tonight." Her jaw tightened. "Do what? Point out the obvious?" "Humiliate her," he said simply. The room held its breath. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped from Sophia's face, anger flashing naked and sharp. She covered it quickly, leaning back in her chair with a brittle laugh. Humiliate, don't be dramatic, I'm only telling the truth. But the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. I sat silent, my pulse roaring. The urge to speak surged like a tide, but years of silence pressed heavy. Was tonight the night I broke it? Or was I still the girl who fled down hotel steps, clutching an award she no longer wanted? My grandfather's hand found mine again. His skin was papery, fragile, but his grip carried surprising strength. You'll know when the right moment comes, Cass, he whispered, and I understood. Tonight was not about sparring for every word. Tonight was about surviving the storm until the eye arrived. The meal dragged on. Conversations circled shallow waters, never daring the depths. My mother asked Ethan about his photography. My father inquired about the traffic from the airport. No one mentioned London. No one mentioned New York. The past sat uninvited but immovable at the table. Sophia sipped her wine, eyes darting between me and Ethan like she was searching for cracks in a wall. Daniel barely touched his plate. At one point, Ethan leaned toward me, voice barely audible. Breathe. And I realized I had been holding my breath for minutes at a time, lungs aching, chest tight, so I breathed. And the night stretched on. The candle flames quivered each time someone moved, as though even the air was anxious. The main course had been cleared, replaced by plates of fruit and small pastries. My mother was speaking about renovations in the garden, roses she planned to plant, a new stone path she wanted built, but her words floated like paper boats, fragile and irrelevant. No one truly listened. Sophia leaned back in her chair, balancing her glass between two fingers. It's charming, really, she said, eyes on me. The way you've reappeared, like a ghost deciding to haunt us again. I inhaled slowly. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table. I met Sophia's gaze. Ghosts don't haunt Sophia. They linger because someone refuses to let them rest. Her smile thinned. And you think we've been keeping you alive all this time? I don't think about it, I said, voice steadier than I felt. I live. The simplicity of it unsettled her. She laughed, brittle and quick, as if to shake off the sting. Daniel shifted again, his fork untouched on the dessert plate. He looked pale, sick almost. His eyes lifted toward me, then dropped, lifted again. He opened his mouth, closed it, then rubbed his temple with a trembling hand. Something pressed inside me, a cruel blend of fury and pity. He had been part of the betrayal, but he was also drowning in it now. That didn't absolve him, but it twisted the knife in strange ways. Sophia reached over and touched his arm. Darling, you're quiet tonight, she purred, though her eyes flicked toward me. He pulled slightly away. I don't have much to say. The admission was quiet, but it struck louder than any accusation. My grandfather cleared his throat, drawing all attention. He leaned forward, resting his frail hands on the table. His voice was thin but deliberate. We have forgotten what this table means, he said. It is not a stage. It is not a courtroom. It is where we break bread, where we share blood and memory. If you cannot sit here without tearing each other apart, then you do not belong at it. His words fell heavy. Sophia smiled sweetly. Grandfather, you always say such wise things, but honesty isn't tearing apart, it's necessary. He fixed her with a look sharp enough to pierce her armor. Honesty without compassion is cruelty, and cruelty has no place in this house. Sophia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. For a moment, I glimpsed the girl she had once been, the one who climbed trees with me, who whispered secrets under blankets. But the moment passed, and her mask returned. The conversation dwindled again, filled only with the clink of cutlery. My father poured himself yet another glass of wine, his cheeks flushed now. My mother's smile was beginning to crack at the edges. Ethan leaned closer, voice soft against my ear. She's trying to provoke you, don't give her what she wants. I know, I whispered back. My hand trembled under the table, and he covered it with his own. Across the table, Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the intimacy between us. Her lips curved, not in joy but calculation. So, she said suddenly, how did you two meet, or is that another secret we aren't entitled to? The question dropped like a stone. I froze. Ethan didn't. He smiled, warm, steady. At an exhibit, he answered smoothly. I was showing my work. She was pretending not to notice it. I noticed her instead. The simplicity of it silenced the room. Even Sophia couldn't immediately find a barb. I turned my head, looking at him, and for a moment the room blurred. It was just him and me, the truth of us, quiet, solid, unshakable, and then Sophia laughed. How poetic, almost believable. Anger flared hot in my chest. Before I could speak, my grandfather's voice cut through again. It does not matter how they met. It matters that they did. That is enough. His finality allowed no argument. Even Sophia fell silent. The plates were cleared. Coffee was served in delicate porcelain cups. Hour had grown late, the house groaning softly with night. Conversation died entirely now. We sat in uneasy silence, sipping coffee that tasted like ash. Sophia stared at me across the table, unblinking, her smile now gone. Daniel rubbed at his eyes. My father leaned back, half drifting in wine. My mother folded and unfolded her napkin as though it might rescue her. I stared into the dark swirl of my coffee and thought, this is only the beginning. The storm was circling, tightening. Sophia would not stop. Daniel was unraveling. My mother and father were clinging to order that no longer existed, and my grandfather, though strong in spirit, could not shield us forever. The war had not erupted tonight, not fully. But every strike of Sophia's spoon against her glass, every glare across the table, every word unsaid, it was all gunpowder. The match was waiting, and I would have to decide when to light it. The coffee had gone cold in my cup. I held it between my palms anyway, grateful for the small weight anchoring me as the silence pressed in from every corner of the dining room. The candles guttered, throwing shadows across familiar walls, and the clock on the mantel ticked with merciless precision, each second dragging the night closer to its inevitable breaking point. I could feel it, the pressure gathering like thunderclouds. Sophia would not let the evening end in quiet retreat. She never had. My mother folded her napkin for the 10th time, her hands moving as though stitching invisible seams. My father reached for the decanter again, the liquid glugging into his glass louder than any of our breaths. My grandfather sat straighter than I expected of him, eyes fixed on Sophia as though he, too, anticipated the blow. It came, sharp and bright. "Well," Sophia began, her spoon circling the rim of her cup, chiming like a warning bell. "That was a charming little dinner. Almost peaceful. But let's not pretend, shall we?" Her eyes found mine. They glittered, hard and unblinking. "You didn't come back here just to eat soup and bread. You came back because you want something, so why don't we stop playing and get to the truth?" The words landed like a challenge tossed across a battlefield. I inhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. "Not everything has to be a game, Sophia," she laughed. "With you, it always is. You vanish for years, reappear with a husband none of us knew existed, and sit at this table as though nothing happened. You've always been good at pretending, Ashley." My name in her mouth was poison. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table, grounding me. "Pretending?" he asked, his voice calm but edged. "Seems to me she's the only one here not pretending." Sophia's gaze snapped to him. "And you are?" "My husband," I said firmly, the words louder than I intended. They cut through the room, startling even myself. "The one you know nothing about because I chose not to invite you into my life." My mother flinched, my father frowned, Sophia only smiled wider. "There it is," she murmured. "The bite, I wondered how long it would take." Daniel shifted in his chair. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale. "Sophia, don't," she snapped, turning on him. "Don't you dare." He fell silent, staring down at his plate as though it could swallow him whole. Something inside me cracked at the sight. Once I would have reached for him. Once I would have asked what weighed on him so heavily. But that was before the betrayal, before his silence became another blade in my back. Now I simply watched. My grandfather cleared his throat, his voice rasping but strong. "This table is not a stage for cruelty. If you cannot speak with respect, you will not speak at all." Sophia's smile froze, brittle as glass. "Respect is earned, grandfather, not given freely." His eyes sharpened. "Family is not currency, it is blood, and you squander it each time you open your mouth to wound." The silence that followed was thick. Sophia looked away first, reaching for her wine as though it might shield her. But the calm didn't last, it never did. Sophia set her glass down with deliberate precision. "Fine, if no one else will say it, I will. Ashley isn't here out of love, she's here because she wants control. She wants to claw her way back into the family after years of absence. And you," she pointed her spoon at Ethan, her eyes narrowing, "you're just her shield, her little pawn to make her look strong." My chest burned. I felt Ethan tense beside me, but he said nothing. He didn't need to, this was mine to answer. I pushed my chair back slightly, enough to make the wood scrape against the floor. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. "You think everything is about power, Sophia, because that's all you've ever cared about. Control. Appearances. Winning. But I didn't come back here to win. I came back because I'm done running." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered with a scoff. "Brave speech. But where was that bravery when you left? Where was it when Daniel—" She stopped, biting down hard on the rest of the sentence. The blood in my ears roared. My hands clenched into fists. "Finish it," I said, my voice low. "Go on, say his name, say what you did." Daniel's head shot up, eyes wide, panic flashing across his face. "Ashley, Don't, I snapped, the words shaking. You don't get to say my name like it absolves you. The room went silent. My mother looked stricken. My father's mouth opened, then closed. My grandfather's gaze burned steady. Sophia leaned back, smiling like a cat. There it is. Finally, the truth trying to crawl out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the chandelier from the ceiling and shatter every glass on the table. But instead, I took a breath, and then another until my voice came out calm, deliberate. You betrayed me, Sophia. You and Daniel both. You thought I'd stay silent forever, that if I disappeared long enough, no one would remember. But I do, and I will not let you pretend anymore. The words cracked through the room like thunder. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Sophia's smile faltered. My mother whispered my name, pleading, but I pressed on. I didn't come back to beg. I didn't come back to hide. I came back to stand where I should have stood years ago. You don't get to erase me, not anymore. My voice shook at the end, but it was done. The dam had broken. Sophia's laugh was sharp, too loud. How dramatic. You think anyone will believe you? After all these years, you have nothing but accusations. I reached into my bag. My fingers brushed the folder Sophia hadn't seen, the transcripts, the printed pages, the evidence left by my grandfather. I didn't pull it out yet. Not here, not at this table, but just the touch steadied me. I don't need belief, I said softly. I have the truth, and when the time comes, it will be enough. Her face paled for a heartbeat. Then the mask returned. The table fractured after that. My father muttered something about business, retreating into his wine. My mother tried to steer the conversation back to gardens and travel, her voice trembling. Daniel excused himself to the hallway, his footsteps dragging. Sophia seethed in silence, lips pressed thin. My grandfather raised his cup once more, his eyes on me. To courage, he said simply. I lifted my cup. Ethan did the same. My mother's hands shook, but she raised hers too. My father didn't move. Sophia glared but followed, her pride refusing to be the only one sitting still. The coffee was bitter, but it burned clean. Later, as the plates were cleared and the family dispersed into separate corners of the house, I lingered in the dining room. Ethan stayed beside me, quiet, steady. My grandfather's hand rested on my shoulder as he passed, a silent benediction. I looked at the long, empty table, the battlefield where nothing had been resolved, but everything had been set in motion. The storm had broken, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The dining room emptied, but its silence clung to me like smoke. The candles guttered low, their wax pooling like spilled time, and the clock on the mantel ticked on as though mocking the absence of voices. Chairs were askew, napkins twisted, glasses smeared with fingerprints, evidence of a war fought not with fists, but with words and glares and silence sharp enough to cut skin. Ethan lingered beside me, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. He hadn't spoken since the toast, but his presence was an anchor, a reminder that I wasn't adrift even as the tides of memory and fury churned within me. I traced the grain of the wooden table with my fingertips, following grooves worn smooth by decades of meals, birthdays, Christmases, ordinary Tuesdays. This table had once meant safety. Tonight it had become a battlefield. Behind me, the hall creaked with departing footsteps. My mother's heels clicked in brisk retreat, her voice trailing toward the kitchen in clipped instructions to the staff. My father's heavier tread staggered toward his study, the door closing with the finality of surrender. Somewhere above, a door slammed, Sophia's, sharp as a gunshot. Only my grandfather remained, moving slowly, deliberately. He shuffled to my side, his cane tapping softly against the floor. His hand, thin as parchment, settled on my shoulder. You spoke, he said, voice low, rough with age but resonant with pride. I swallowed hard. I had to, he squeezed gently. No, Cass, you chose to, and that is what matters. Tears pricked, but I blinked them back. I had shed enough in silence. Tonight was for strength. Ethan pulled out a chair for my grandfather, and the old man lowered himself into it with care. He looked across the table at the wreckage of plates and glasses, then back to me. The storm has broken. Now you must decide how to stand in it. Later, in the quiet of my childhood room, I unpacked the folder from my bag. Pages rustled, the inked words of my grandfather's letter stark against the lamplight. The USB drive gleamed like a secret talisman. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, watching me. You didn't use it tonight. I shook my head. It wasn't the place. You were magnificent without it. His voice was steady, sincere. But you know as well as I do, they won't stop. Sophia won't stop. Daniel's silence won't last, and your parents, they'll pretend until pretending destroys them. I pressed the folder shut, my hands trembling. I know. Ethan reached over, covering my hands with his. Then what's next? I exhaled slowly. The court, the board, wherever this fight takes me. And me? He asked softly. I met his gaze. With me? He smiled, faint but fierce. Always. The next morning dawned gray, the sky swollen with rain, the house smelled of damp stone and old wood. I found my grandfather in the garden, seated on a wrought iron bench beneath the withering oak. He looked small against the vastness of the trees, but his presence filled the air. I joined him, the grass damp beneath my shoes. He didn't look at me immediately. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the land dipped toward the river. When your mother was a girl, he said, she used to run through these fields and swear she would never leave. She wanted roots, deep and unshakable. But roots can become chains when you fear losing them. I frowned. And Sophia, he sighed. Sophia was born reaching, always climbing, always grasping. She believed she was owed the sky, and she resented anyone who stood taller, even you. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth lay too heavy. He turned to me, his eyes sharp despite their cloudiness. You cannot save them, Cass. You can only choose who you will be in their shadow. Do not let their hunger become yours. The words cut deep, but they steadied me. I won't, I whispered. He nodded once, satisfied. Then when the time comes, you will be ready. That afternoon, Ethan and I drove into town. The courthouse loomed, stern and unyielding, its steps slick with rain. Sophia and Daniel were already there, dressed in dark clothes that screamed strategy rather than grief. My mother stood between them, pale and tight-lipped, while my father lingered at the edge, his gaze fixed anywhere but on me. Sophia's eyes met mine across the courtyard. Her smile was thin, triumphant, as though she had already won. Ethan's hand found mine. Breathe, he murmured, and I did. I breathed deep, tasting rain on the air, and with each breath I felt the weight shift. For years, questions had crushed me. Tonight, the answers were mine. I climbed the steps, the folder tucked beneath my arm. The storm awaited. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and paper, the kind of smell that clung to old halls of judgment. Light filtered through tall windows, turning dust motes into tiny embers. The benches were half full, family friends, shareholders, strangers who thrived on gossip and spectacle. The weight of their eyes pressed against my back as I entered. Ethan walked beside me, his presence calm, steady. My grandfather had insisted on coming too, though the strain showed in his slow steps and labored breath. He leaned on his cane, each tap on the tiled floor a declaration that he would not be left behind. At the far table, Sophia sat with her lawyers, immaculate in a dark suit. Her hair gleamed, her expression serene, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Daniel sat slightly behind her, his posture slouched, his gaze unfocused, as though the ground beneath him had long since given way. My parents occupied the row behind them. My mother's face was pale, lips pressed into a line. My father stared straight ahead, stone-like, though his hands twisted in his lap. When Sophia's eyes met mine, her lips curved into that familiar, poisonous smile. Let the games begin, it seemed to say. The judge entered, the room rose, then settled. Proceedings began, motions, documents, the rhythm of legal ritual. Words blurred until my name was spoken and I was called to the stand. I walked forward, each step heavier than the last. I swore the oath, took my seat, and folded my hands to keep them from trembling. Sophia's lawyer rose first. His voice was smooth, polished. Miss Harper, you left the family company years ago, did you not? I did, I said. You severed ties, you made no attempt to maintain involvement, and now suddenly you return. Would you tell us why? His tone implied greed, ambition. I steadied my breath. Because my grandfather left me a responsibility, and because I will not see what he built torn apart. The lawyer smirked faintly. A noble answer. But isn't it true you stand to gain significantly if the court validates his will? Power, wealth, control. I met his gaze. I stand to gain the chance to protect the people who depend on this company. That is what matters. A murmur rippled through the room. Then it was our turn. My lawyer introduced the folder, the letter, the transcripts. Pages were handed up to the judge. The USB drive was connected to the screen. The video flickered to life. There was my grandfather, seated in his study, voice steady. Across from him, Sophia and Daniel. The words filled the courtroom, unflinching. I will not sell. You are tired, my mother's voice snapped from the recording. The offer is generous, Daniel said. The company is the future, my grandfather answered. You think Alexandra will run it? She knows nothing. She knows more than you, my grandfather declared. She has clarity, that is why it will be hers. The video cut out. Silence followed, heavier than stone. Sophia's face was pale, her mask cracked. Daniel buried his face in his hands. My mother looked as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. This recording establishes clear intent and soundness of mind. It also reveals attempts at coercion. My lawyer nodded. Precisely, Your Honor. The estate is not merely inheritance, it is protection, and my client has honored that responsibility. Sophia's lawyer rose again, flustered. The video could be taken out of context, but the judge's gavel struck. Enough, the evidence is plain. All eyes turned to Sophia. Her composure wavered, then collapsed. She stood abruptly, her voice rising. You don't understand. He was old, stubborn. He would have let everything rot rather than change. I was trying to save us. Save yourself, I said quietly, but the microphone carried it. Her head whipped toward me, eyes blazing. You think you're better than me? You abandoned us. You left me to clean up the mess, and now you come back with your perfect husband and your self-righteous speeches? Her voice cracked. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Daniel rose slowly beside her. For once, his voice cut through hers. She's right about one thing, he said hoarsely. She was alone, but not because of you, Ashley. Because of me, I let it happen. Sophia's head snapped toward him. Daniel, he shook his head. No, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. The room froze. Sophia stared at him, betrayal etched into every line of her face. I looked at him, my chest tight. There was no forgiveness in me, but there was recognition. At last, he had spoken. The judge called for order, gavel striking again. This court recognizes the validity of the will and the clear intent of the deceased. Alexandra Harper is confirmed as executor of the estate and controlling interest of Harper Biotech. The words fell like a final chord, vibrating through the room. I closed my eyes just for a moment. Relief washed over me, not triumphant but clean, like a wound finally stitched. When I opened them, Sophia was staring at me, eyes burning with hatred and something else, loss. My mother wept silently, my father slumped, defeated. Daniel sat down heavily, hands covering his face. Ethan reached for my hand and I let him take it. Outside the courthouse, rain fell in soft sheets. The crowd dispersed, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers. My grandfather stood beside me, frail but upright, his cane planted firmly on the wet stone. You did it, he murmured. I shook my head. We did it, he smiled faintly. No, Cass, you carried it, you carried us. Ethan slipped an arm around me, warm against the chill. So what now? He asked. I looked out at the city, the wet streets gleaming with reflected light. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a beginning. Now, I said softly, we build. Not on ashes, on truth. And with that, I stepped forward into the rain, unafraid.